Mercedes could lose points, not because the trick was illegal, but because Ferrari exposed how it was being used. A hidden engine exploit. Completely legal on paper. Capable of delivering up to 130 extra horsepower in the final meters of the lap, where pole position is decided. No warning. No visible system. No obvious gain. Just one impossible detail. The car wasn't slowing down when every other car had to, and that tiny difference was worth nearly 2/10 per lap. Enough to control qualifying. Enough to shape the grid. Enough to build an illusion of dominance. Until Ferrari noticed it. One pattern. One moment. One question to the FIA. And everything changed. Because the second the FIA started monitoring it, the advantage disappeared overnight. And now, it's no longer just about losing performance. It's about what happens next. Because if intent is proven, lap times can be deleted. Penalties can escalate. And in the worst case, points can be taken away. Which means one thing. This isn't just a technical story anymore. It's a fight for everything Mercedes has achieved so far. At first, it didn't look like a scandal. It looked like brilliance. Because Mercedes wasn't dominating every sector. They weren't clearly faster in every corner. But when it mattered most, they always delivered. The final seconds of the lap. The last straight. That final push to the line. That's where everything changed. And in Formula One, that's everything. Because those final meters decide pole position. They decide track position. They decide the race before it even begins. But here's what made it so dangerous. There was no visible advantage. No obvious boost. No aggressive engine mode. Nothing that would trigger suspicion. Just less loss. And that's almost impossible to detect. Because gaining speed is obvious. But not losing it. That hides in plain sight. So session after session, that hidden advantage kept working. Quietly. Consistently. Building results. Building confidence. Building a narrative that Mercedes was simply faster. But something didn't add up. Because when Ferrari isolated the data, when they focused on the final meters, the pattern broke. Every other car slowed down. Naturally. Predictably. But Mercedes didn't. Their speed held. Sometimes, it even increased. Exactly where the system should be limiting them. And that's the moment everything changes. Because in Formula One, if the data doesn't follow physics, there is always a reason. And once that reason starts to appear, it becomes impossible to ignore. Because patterns like that don't happen by accident. They happen because something is controlling them. And the moment you realize that, you're no longer looking at performance. You're looking at something hidden. Something built into the system itself. Something that, once exposed, doesn't just disappear. It creates consequences. And that's when Ferrari made the move that changed everything. They didn't try to copy it. They didn't keep it quiet. They didn't test it in the background. They went straight to the FIA. And they asked one simple question. Is this allowed? Now that might sound harmless. Routine. But in Formula One, that question is explosive. Because the moment it's asked, the entire system is forced into the light. The FIA has to investigate. They have to analyze every trace. Every shutdown. Every moment where the car behaves differently. And suddenly, what was invisible before becomes impossible to hide. Because now they're not just looking at speed. They're looking at intent. At the exact point where the system stops behaving as expected. And once they find that moment, everything connects. Right before the finish line. At the exact point where every car should begin to lose performance, Mercedes does something different. They don't follow the gradual reduction. They don't accept the limitation. They shut the system off. Completely. No transition. No resistance. And in that instant, the car becomes faster. Because the MGUK stops recovering energy. It stops slowing the car down. It stops creating drag. So the engine keeps pushing, but nothing is holding it back anymore. And in those final meters, that creates the advantage. Up to 130 horsepower, exactly where the lap is decided. The car crosses the line. The lap time is locked. The result is secured. And only then, the penalty activates. 60 seconds without the system. But it happens after the lap. During the cooldown. Where it doesn't matter. So the penalty exists, but the advantage stays. And that's the brilliance of it. A rule designed to prevent this behavior. Used as part of the advantage itself. But that's also why it couldn't last. Because once the FIA understood the intent, the situation changed instantly. This was no longer just innovation. It became a risk. A risk of unpredictable speed differences. A risk of cars behaving in ways others don't expect. And in Formula One, that's where the line is drawn. So the FIA didn't need to change the rules. They did something far more powerful. They started monitoring everything. Every shutdown. Every anomaly. Every trace in the data. And from that moment on, the trick wasn't just exposed. It was finished. And this is where the story turns from clever engineering into real danger for Mercedes. Because once the FIA starts monitoring intent, everything changes. Not just going forward, but potentially going backward. Because now, every single lap is under the microscope. Every shutdown of the system. Every anomaly in the data. Every moment where the car behaves differently. And that creates a new reality. Because before, the trick was invisible. Now, it's traceable. And that's a problem. Because if the FIA can identify when the system was deliberately shut off, they can also identify when it was used before. And that's where things get uncomfortable. Because this wasn't used once. It wasn't accidental. It was repeated. Lap after lap. Session after session. Across multiple race weekends. And that opens the door to something much bigger. Not just losing the advantage, but questioning the results that came from it. Because if intent can be proven, if the FIA decides that the system was used deliberately for performance gain, then it's no longer just a technical curiosity. It becomes a sporting issue. And sporting issues have consequences. Real ones. Lap times can be invalidated. Results can be reviewed. Penalties can be applied retroactively. And in extreme cases, points can be taken away. Now, that's the scenario nobody wants to talk about. But it exists. Because Formula One has one rule above all. If performance is gained in a way that goes against the spirit of the regulations, even if it was technically legal at the time, the FIA can act. And that's what puts Mercedes in a difficult position. Because now, they are not just defending performance. They are defending interpretation, intent, decision-making. And that's much harder. Because you can't measure it with lap times. You can't hide it in data. It comes down to one question. Did they know exactly what they were doing? And if the answer is yes, then the consequences become very real. But here's the twist. Because while all of this is happening, the season doesn't stop. The next race arrives. The next qualifying session begins. And Mercedes has to perform under pressure. Without the trick. Without the margin. Without the safety net. And with every move being watched. Every lap analyzed. Every result questioned. And that changes everything. Because now, it's not just about being fast. It's about being clean. Precise. Undeniable. Because any anomaly now? Any unusual behavior? Any unexpected gain? Will immediately raise suspicion. And that's the real pressure. Not just competing against other teams, but competing under scrutiny. And that's where this story reaches its most important point. Because this isn't just about what Mercedes lost. It's about what they have to prove. That their speed was real. That their results were deserved. That they can still win, without anything hidden. And in Formula One, that kind of proof only comes one way. On track. Lap after lap. With nothing left to hide. And now, for the first time this season, that's exactly what they have to do. And this is where everything reaches its breaking point. Because once scrutiny enters the equation, performance alone is no longer enough. Now, every result has to be defended. Every lap has to be explained. Every gain has to make sense. And that changes how a team operates. Because before, Mercedes could focus purely on performance. Finding time. Extracting speed. Maximizing every detail. Now, they have to think about something else. Visibility. How it looks. How it's interpreted. How it's analyzed after the session is over. Because the FIA is no longer just observing outcomes. They're observing behavior. And that creates hesitation. Not in a dramatic way, but in small decisions. Tiny moments. Do we push this setting? Do we risk this configuration? Do we operate at the limit, or just below it? And in Formula One, those small decisions cost time. Hundredths at first, then tenths. And suddenly, the gap appears. But here's where the pressure becomes relentless. Because this isn't happening in isolation. While Mercedes is adjusting, other teams are doing the opposite. They're pushing forward. Confident. Stable. Unchanged. Ferrari doesn't need to rethink anything. They never used the system. Their performance stays exactly the same. Their data remains clean. Their direction remains clear. And in this new environment, that clarity becomes an advantage. Because while Mercedes is questioning, Ferrari is executing. And that difference grows with every session, every lap, every weekend. But the real shift is psychological. Because once a team knows they are being watched, they drive differently. They operate differently. They take fewer risks. And in a sport where risk creates performance, that matters. Because now, Mercedes is no longer just fighting for speed. They're fighting for trust. Trust from the FIA. Trust from the paddock. Trust from the results themselves. And that's a completely different kind of pressure. Because speed can be built. Performance can be improved. But trust, once questioned, has to be rebuilt. And that takes time. Time they don't have. Because the season is moving. The races keep coming. The opportunities keep shrinking. And every weekend now becomes a test. Not just of performance, but of legitimacy. And that leads to the final moment of truth. Because at some point, the stopwatch will tell the real story. Without interference. Without hidden systems. Without anything to question. Just pure performance. And when that moment comes, there will be no debate. No interpretation. No doubt. Only one answer. What Mercedes really is when everything is exposed. And whether everything they achieved before still stands when nothing is left to hide.